My name is Charlie Bolden. I am actually now the 12th NASA administrator. I'm a retired Marine and formerly an astronaut. And this incredible vehicle behind us is Discovery. And it's actually the Space Shuttle Discovery that flew probably more than any remaining spacecraft. And I had an opportunity to fly it twice. Once as the pilot on STS-31 when we deployed the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990. And then my final flight in 1994 when I was the commander for STS-60.
And what's it like to fly this thing?
It's pretty awesome. It's, you know, as I was saying when we were talking in just general conversation, you don't get to fly it very much. It's not like an airplane that you're at the controls all the time, because it's an amazing autonomous vehicle when you decide that that's the way you want to do it. And that's the way it's flown most of the time. We never get involved with the ascent. We're trained to do it, but we've never had a need to take over and fly it manually. And then most of the entry is done autonomously. And because of the custom in the United States, the crew always, the pilot and commander always take over when we go subsonic and then actually affect the landing. So, but it flies like sort of halfway between a big airplane like a KC-135 or a Boeing 707 and an F-18. So it's almost as maneuverable as an F-18, but not quite as lumbering as a KC-135.
Now, you've been involved with space both as an astronaut and an administrator for many years.
Yes.
Do you think we are at the dawn of a new space era?
People talk about the dawn of a new space era. I think we are definitely there, and it's totally different from the era that most people either remember or read about and convince themselves they remember, people who weren't even around. But everybody goes back to the Apollo era. This is not that. That was a matter of geopolitical, two nations looking to attain and maintain geopolitical dominance, the United States and the Soviet Union. Today it's more collaboration, cooperation. The competition is actually in the commercial sector. As you see when you all, I think, were at the Kennedy Space Center to see a SpaceX launch, the competition today is for access to space. NASA doesn't do that anymore, nor do we need to. We rely on commercial entities. I think it's a totally different era.
When you took over as administrator of NASA in 2009, I think it was.
Yes.
You said shortly after that you intended to turn science fiction into fact. How did you get on with that mission?
We did pretty well, I think. You know, I tell people all the time when we talk about what it was like when I was growing up, there were a lot of things that were just purely science fiction. I mean, going to space was science fiction when I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. Today, while not routine, it is routine enough that people don't even pay any attention to it anymore. People in the United States complain that, well, we're not involved in human spaceflight anymore. Why do they do that? Because it's so routine that they don't realize that we've been living and working in space continuously for 17 years now. You can go to the United States Congress, and I don't know how many of the 500 and some odd senators and congressmen you ask about human spaceflight, and they'll tell you, well, we're going to get there. We're going to get back into space, not realizing that a 17-year-old kid anywhere around the world today has not taken a single breath when people have not been living and working on the International Space Station.
As you were alluding to, that there are a lot of players now in space, both
Lots.
different nation states and commercial entities. What do you think NASA does today which no one else can do?
I think NASA's role today is totally different from it used to be. We used to be competing, for example, with Roscosmos or the Russian Space Agency. Today we are the integrator. NASA is the agency that brings the other space agencies of the world together, particularly for human spaceflight. Everybody can pretty much do robotic operations on their own, but we still collaborate. It's very interesting to me to find that there are very few missions that any one nation does by themselves. The Indians were incredible in getting to Mars, their very first attempt with MOM, the Mars orbiting mission. We're now working with the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, on their first attempt to get to Mars. So it's international collaboration, and NASA is the integrator, the way that you see us operate today.
That's interesting, because as you're saying, space was really born out of competition, superpower rivalry, but it's now collaboration is indispensable, do you think?
Successful space today is collaboration. If you talk about the Hubble Space Telescope, well, Discovery behind me delivered the Hubble Space Telescope to orbit, but that was the work of a number of nations, dominantly the United States and NASA, but the work of many nations. The James Webb Space Telescope that we're going to launch in a year and a half or so is going to dwarf the capabilities of Hubble. That's an international mission that has components on it from a lot of different nations. The International Space Station is the best example of unbelievable international collaboration at a time of strife. There's a lot of bad stuff going on down here on Earth. We can't talk to the Russians diplomatically and politically, it seems, and yet we live and work with cosmonauts and members of the Russian Space Agency every single day.
A lot of former astronauts have said that going to space gives you a completely different perspective on Earth and the problems that we have down here. Do you think it is a stimulus to greater kind of global cooperation?
I'm asked a lot about what is it about spaceflight that brings people together. It's several things. One is the view of the planet. There are no borders, there are no boundaries. You see the fact that I like to tell people we live in one ocean, not multiple oceans. We call the different segments of it by different names, but it's one ocean on this planet, and there are little bodies of land that stick up. And that is obvious. I mean, just immediately it strikes you when you get to space and you look back on our planet. That's one thing. The other thing is you recognize the fact that everybody has capabilities that they bring to the table. There's some things that the Canadians do incredibly well, robotic operations, some optics. The Russians are superb with propulsion systems. We can find something that every nation that's a partner does a little bit better than the other.
And how did your time in space personally change you and your views of the world?
How did my time in space change me? I'm asked that question quite frequently, and usually people are asking about faith, religion. It didn't change me at all. It strengthened my faith. I happen to be a person of faith. I call myself that anyway, and I happen to call Christianity my religion of choice. So going to space, looking back on this planet, but also turning around and looking away, looking at what we can see of the solar system and the rest of the universe, I was just strengthened in my belief that there is some supreme power that put all this stuff together and orchestrated it. So not a significant change there.
Now, you mentioned the Hubble telescope, which you deployed when you were in Discovery. Could you tell us a bit more about that? What have we discovered through Hubble that we didn't know before?
When you talk about Hubble and its discoveries, and people ask, okay, what do we know that we didn't know? We know that the universe is expanding. That was a big question. Is the universe contracting or expanding? We learned that some of the physical laws that we had accepted for decades, if not hundreds of years, weren't quite right. I'm out of my league when I talk about the fancy stuff, but we understand now better what's called the Hubble constant, which is it's a factor that helps us understand how fast the universe is expanding. Hubble has allowed us, in collaboration with other instruments like Spitzer telescope and some other planet finders, we now know that there are other planets orbiting other stars. And I think those things probably would not have come into being if we had not had the Hubble Space Telescope. So Hubble was one of the primary instruments that have led to my statement that we have turned science fiction into science fact.
It's said sometimes that there are three goals of space exploration: to enable us to learn more about our own planet, to enable us to learn more about the solar system, and to turn man into an interplanetary species. Which of those three goals do you think is the most important?
If you talk about what many people consider to be the three goals of spaceflight, looking at and understanding our own planet, looking at and understanding the solar system, and then making us a multi-planetary species, is one more important than the other? No, to be quite honest. One of them that I think is critical that I don't think a lot of people understand is the importance of understanding this planet on which we live. The Apollo astronauts, particularly after Apollo 8, when we got the blue marble picture, said, we left this planet only to look back and discover ourselves. That's what we do when we go, like we have a mission right now called OSIRIS-REx that's on its way to rendezvous with an asteroid called Bennu. It's going to almost land on Bennu, get a sample, relatively big sample, bring it back and drop it in the Utah desert. We will learn more about Earth from that sample that comes from an asteroid that's also orbiting the sun as we are. Every time we go to Mars, whether it's with the Curiosity rover or Opportunity or the orbiting missions, we learn more and more about this our own planet. So in a way, I would have to say, of the three things that we do for humanity, that's probably the most important, because we've got to protect this planet. The more we understand about it, the more we can do to protect it.
Now, government budgets are under pressure all around the world at the moment. What's the economic case for space? How can you justify to those congressmen you were talking about earlier?
We have a constant discussion about what is the return on investment. That's the ROI. That's the term that everybody today wants to use when you talk about space flight. It is easy to measure that when you talk about cargo to space. When NASA decided that we were going to push through with the mandate that we retire the space shuttle and turn to American industry and other industry to provide access to space, the business case for cargo was easy. It's easy to say, okay, it's going to cost us this amount to launch. We're going to carry this much stuff to orbit, whether it's satellites or other things, and we can see how much value we get from that. Humans is a little bit harder. I am still not convinced that we have a business case for humans going to Mars. We've had studies done by the National Research Council and everybody. Most people come up with the same response. We can't put a dollar value on it. However, it's something that we cannot not do. And it's because it allows humanity to expand our knowledge of the universe. It allows us to take the challenge of proving that humans can in fact move out into the solar system, and that there's essentially no limit on our capabilities to do what it is once we set our minds to it. So it's critically important.
How realistic is the possibility of going to Mars?
Mars is, I get asked all the time, are you guys kidding? And the answer is no, we're not kidding. It's within our grasp. We're closer to sending humans to Mars today than we've ever been. I think the 2030s is the target decade that we have set at NASA. The U.S. Congress has now accepted that, and the President, in the last NASA Authorization Act, Mars was established as a goal for the agency, and we believe that the 2030s is the time we're going to do it. I'll go back to something I said earlier, though. We will do it much easier. It's not going to be easy, but we'll do it much easier if we can continue the international collaboration that we have today. One of the things that I think is going to add great value and going to increase our probability of success is adding on more nations that we currently exclude, mainly China. So I think when you add China to the mix, you're going to find that we'll be able to do a couple of things that we want to do. We'll be able to put humans back on the moon, while simultaneously moving out to Mars, with the U.S. leading the Mars mission, maybe China or Russia or someone else, or the Europeans leading the lunar surface operation.
When President Trump was talking to the astronauts on ISS the other day, he seemed to indicate that it could be done within his time frame.
I disagree with the president. You can do anything. You cannot. There is a saying in the Marine Corps. It's probably not the Marine Corps, but there's a saying in aviation that a vision without finance is a hallucination. Many of us were are still hoping that President Trump's first budget will show a significant increase in the amount to be spent on human spaceflight. Without a significant increase in the amount, the 2030s that's about as early as we can do it. Okay. You're from the Financial Times, so you understand that about, you can talk big talk all you want, but if you're not putting money toward it, it ain't going to happen.
Now, we were talking a bit about some of the commercial operators, the SpaceX's, the Blue Origins. What do you think of these companies? And have we swapped the kind of goal of scientific exploration for space tourism?
I'm asked frequently, what about commercial companies? I am in love with them. I was a healthy skeptic when I became the NASA administrator in 2009. And my skepticism was based on my belief that they were pushed by what I call space commercial ideologues. people who believed then, and some still believe, just get NASA out of the business, get governments out of the business, just give all the money to entrepreneurs and the like, and they'll do it all. And I just don't believe that. I think NASA's role today, like I said, is serving as the integrator, serving as the trailblazer. There are some things that, one, are too expensive, too risky for entrepreneurs and commercial entities to do today. Going out and blazing the trail to Mars, I think, is the responsibility of agencies like NASA and Roscosmos and the Chinese Space Agency and others, and then bring commercial entities along as we can. Most of the technological advancements, when you look at it, have still been done by government, by NASA. There are some business innovation that's been done by the commercial entities, and that's the role that I think they play. If you look at a SpaceX, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin are doing incredible work right now, but SpaceX has challenged the community to get the cost of launch down. That's critical, and that's what will make this, when you talk about the business case, that's what helps the business case close. If you can get the cost of kilograms to space down significantly, I think you're going to see an explosion in the use there. Tourism, I don't know that, when I go back to my comment about human spaceflight, tourism is human spaceflight. I have not seen the business case close on space tourism as a viable commercial undertaking. I think it will happen because people just want to do it. And there will be people who will have the money to do it. We've got to get the cost down, though, if you want to have the average man, woman on the street, if you want to make it like airlines today. Yeah.
We talked to some ex-NASA people who expressed the fear that these new space companies were, in a way, sucking the ambition or sucking the lifeblood out of NASA. They were hiring a lot of the best people. They were the kind of cool guys on the block.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I would disagree with that. I would disagree with anyone that says that the entrepreneurial companies are taking talent away from NASA. What we're all trying to do is inspire the current young generation, kids in elementary school, middle school, high school, to want to get into the STEM fields. Anybody that can inspire them, can get them excited about doing that, I think is a part of the team. And so entrepreneurial companies have managed to do that. It takes a certain breed of cat, if you will, to work for somebody like a SpaceX. The tempo is unbelievable. When we've had people leave NASA, go to some of the entrepreneurial companies, and then come back and say, that was interesting, but I like it over here where I can actually do some cutting edge kind of stuff. And I think there's a role for all of us. I'm not worried about the entrepreneurial entities at all. I'm encouraged by their ability to inspire and bring people into the field.
And you don't think the public sector, which has made this enormous investment in space infrastructure over so many decades, should have more of a clawback from the private sector if they are now earning profits out of their activities?
I tell you, a question you pose and that Congress asks a lot is, should NASA get a payback? Should the government get a payback from all these things that you've made possible? Should entrepreneurial firms be required to pay something to the government? My answer is no. They pay tax, they generate revenue, they create a new industry. All of that results in funds to a government. So I think they're doing what we expect of any other business. They're a business enterprise. When they make what the government requirement is to monitor them and to oversee, to make sure that when they make a profit, then some of it goes back to the government in the form of taxation or whatever, however the government chooses to charge them.
Right. Now, you've talked a lot about how from space you can see the visible effects of climate change on the Earth. How alarmed are you by this current administration's cutting of kind of scientific funding for those kind of research projects?
I am asked frequently about my opinion of the current administration and their attitude or their actions about climate change. I am guardedly optimistic that they will come to their senses. We've heard a lot of talk about what they want to do, but other than putting people in place who are not, I don't think, are the very best in terms of guarding the environment, I've not seen any drastic action taken yet. NASA's budget to take us to the end of this current fiscal year, and by the time you all talk about this presentation, we may be with another budget, but that's where I think we need to look. Where are they putting the money? Are they taking money out of studies of earth science? And to date, NASA hasn't seen that dramatic effect, and so I'm guardedly optimistic that we will realize the importance of understanding climate and climate change, and we won't do anything drastic. We're seeing nations of the world come together. We're seeing people in the U.S. who are rising up and saying, wait a minute, I know I said that I didn't want to do this, but this is important. And I think it will take the people of each country saying this is really important.
Right. And could you tell us about the SLS? What is that?
The Space Launch System, SLS, is the heavy lift launch vehicle that NASA is presently preparing for deep space missions. It'll be the largest launch vehicle that we've ever produced, that anybody's ever produced. We'll have the capability of not only carrying humans back to the moon, onto Mars, but the scientific community is looking at it now because of its what we call the throw capability, its ability to take increasingly large payloads to distant parts of the solar system without having to go into all these assist orbits. Like I mentioned OSIRIS-REx earlier, it's now coming back to make a pass around Earth so it can accelerate its way out to the asteroid. We actually believe that the SLS with its upper stage rocket will be so powerful that instead of having to do that kind of trajectory to get something to Jupiter, it'll launch and it'll go right to Jupiter, and it'll cut down on the transit time for scientific payloads from about, I think, 5 to 7 years to as low as 2 to 3 years. So significant savings in time, which is a significant savings in money, and getting to the science much earlier.
And when do you think it might come into operation?
We're going to fly SLS probably in November of 2018, so a little bit more than a year and a half from now, hopefully.
And would that be the rocket that would take people to Mars? Or?
That'll be the rocket that'll take people to Mars. Some of the entrepreneurs, to include them, have ideas of also going to Mars on their heavy lift vehicle. It depends, and I think that can be done. We looked at using smaller rockets than SLS to get things to Mars. The detractor is, in order to get enough stuff there to support humans on the surface of Mars, it takes an unbelievable number of individual launches. We think a couple of 2, 3 SLS launches, and you've got the 30, 40, 50 metric tons to put on the surface of Mars that will be required to sustain life for humans.
So some people talk about colonizing Mars. Is that possible?
When I'm asked about colonizing Mars, I kind of go, not in my lifetime. I am not, I never say never. Colonizing is we've been here in the U.S. now for 200 and how many years? 241 or something. I need to do my math. And we're not completely colonized yet. That's a grand undertaking. Mars is an inhospitable environment right now. So we've got a lot of work to get a team of scientists there for a decade or two before you start talking about colonizing, I think.
Finally, I'd like to take you back to Discovery.
Sure.
The shuttle program clearly had some tragic episodes in its life. How did you get in that Discovery and fly after some of those incidents?
Well, people ask about how did I do with the space program after we had an accident. My first flight was on Columbia, and in January of 1986, and I was about as excited as you could be when I came back to Earth, and 10 days later we lost 7 dear friends when we lost Challenger in January of 1986. But I was a part of the team that really dove into it, tried to understand what had happened, why, and could we avoid it, and we came up with a pretty good set of solutions. Not optimal, or not ideal, but satisfactory. And then we came back and lost Columbia in 2003, and avoidable accidents, if you will. Frequently, it's not the hardware, but it's the management and the management decisions that are made. Space flight is risky business, as is aviation. but we've gotten to the point in aviation that we've got a pretty good safety record going. We'll get that way in spaceflight, but we're never going to be where you're not going to have an accident or an incident. That just kind of goes with the territory. Anything that's making new discoveries, that's cutting edge, you're going to have things go wrong periodically. And I think that was one of the reasons I was able to get back up and go right into my next flight, was because I believed in the people and I believed in the system that we had created.
And mentally, people talk about having the right stuff to be an astronaut. Is that something you really need to have, that attitude of risk?
The right stuff. Do you need to have that? I'm not sure what the right stuff is, to be quite honest. My guess is that there's something about me and people like me that separates me from others. I wanted to be a test pilot. I went from never wanting to fly airplanes growing up. When I graduated from high school, two things I knew I was not going to do. One was I was not going to become a Marine by any stretch of the imagination, and I wasn't going to fly airplanes. And then things changed. First time I got into an airplane to train for the Marine Corps, I fell in love with it. And that, over time, I decided I wanted to be a test pilot. I wanted to accept that risk because I knew what I could contribute by being a test pilot. And I think people who have an attitude of service, who want to serve, they generally fall into this kind of stuff because they know that we'll make a difference in humanity, a positive difference. And I think that's one of the things that in NASA's vision, we talk about making life better for all humanity. That's why we do what we do. And there's a certain sense of satisfaction in that I think drives people to do risky things because they figure, okay, in the long term, it's going to benefit humanity.